A man walks out of his annual checkup feeling fine. His doctor told him his cholesterol looked good. 18 months later, he's in an ambulance having a heart attack. This happens more than people realize. Cardiologists actually have a word for it: discordance. Because the number on a standard lab report and a person's real risk don't always line up. There's a blood marker that catches a lot of these mismatch cases, and most people have never had it tested because it isn't part of a routine panel unless someone specifically orders it. It's called ApoB. Before anyone gets the wrong idea, no, your doctor isn't hiding anything from you on purpose. What actually happened is a slower, more boring story involving 1970s lab technology, a math shortcut that's still in use today, and how long it takes medicine to update its habits. Stick around, because that story explains a lot more than a conspiracy ever could. By the end, you'll know what ApoB measures, why it sometimes tells a different story than your LDL number, what the evidence actually supports, and where real scientists still disagree. So, why isn't this test automatic? Go back 50, 60 years, and you'll find the answer. The standard cholesterol panel, total cholesterol, HDL, LDL, triglycerides, was built using the tools and the math available in the 1960s through the 80s. Actually measuring LDL particles directly was expensive and slow back then, totally impractical for a routine blood draw. So a researcher named Friedewald came up with a workaround, a formula that estimates LDL using the other three numbers on the panel, instead of measuring LDL particles themselves. That equation became the standard. Total cholesterol minus HDL minus triglycerides divided by 5. It's still what most labs run today. And to be fair, it worked well enough across large populations to support the major statin trials that followed. The research that made cholesterol-lowering drugs a cornerstone of heart disease prevention. But Friedewald's own team flagged a weakness in it from day one. The formula estimates how much cholesterol is being carried. It doesn't count how many particles are doing the carrying, and it gets noticeably less reliable when triglycerides run high, or in people dealing with diabetes, obesity, or metabolic syndrome. Cargo versus trucks. Hang on to that idea, because the rest of this video is really just one long explanation of why it matters. Picture an LDL particle as a delivery truck moving through your bloodstream. What it's hauling is cholesterol. The standard test estimates the total weight of cargo across every truck on the road combined. Trucks come in different sizes, though. Some are big and packed full. Others are small and carrying a lighter load. If your blood is full of small, lightly loaded trucks, your total cargo weight can come back looking perfectly normal, while the actual number of trucks on the road is high. And the number of trucks turns out to matter more than how much each one is carrying. Atherosclerosis, the plaque buildup behind most heart attacks and strokes, starts when these particles physically wedge themselves into an artery wall. More trucks on the road means more chances for that to happen, no matter how light or heavy each individual load is. That's the gap ApoB fills. ApoB, short for Apolipoprotein B, is a protein sitting on the outside of certain particles in your blood. LDL has it. So do a few related particles, VLDL, IDL, and LPA. And every single one of these particles carries exactly one ApoB molecule. Never 0, never 2, always 1, which means counting ApoB is basically counting trucks directly, instead of weighing cargo and guessing at the truck count from there. That distinction turns out to matter most for a specific group of people, the ones whose LDL-C and ApoB numbers disagree. Researchers studying large population data sets, including the multi-ethnic study of atherosclerosis, have found that people with high ApoB but a deceptively normal-looking LDL-C carry real, measurable extracardiovascular risk that the standard test misses entirely. And this mismatch shows up disproportionately in people with insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, obesity, or metabolic syndrome, the exact same groups where Friedewald's formula was already known to lose accuracy. So, if your triglycerides run high, if you're dealing with diabetes or prediabetes, if you carry extra weight around your midsection, or if heart disease shows up early in your family, despite everyone's cholesterol looking fine, you're a strong candidate for one of these mismatched cases. Now, not all evidence carries equal weight, and it's worth slowing down on this part. Some of the strongest support for ApoB comes from something called Mendelian randomization. Researchers using naturally occurring genetic variation to mimic what a controlled trial would show, without actually running one for decades. A large study published in JAMA looked at genetic variants that lower LDL cholesterol through different biological routes, and found that heart disease risk tracked most closely with how much a given pathway lowered the total ApoB particle count, not with how much it lowered cholesterol weight specifically. Different genetic pathways, same particle count pattern, same outcome. That's a meaningful signal. A 2019 consensus statement from the European Atherosclerosis Society, after reviewing a large stack of existing trial and cohort data, landed in a similar place. ApoB predicts cardiovascular risk at least as well as LDL-C, and it's worth using specifically in patients where LDL-C is more likely to mislead. Cardiology guidelines in both Europe and the US picked up that recommendation around the same time, listing ApoB as a reasonable add-on test for higher risk groups. Neither guideline made it the default test for everyone. That last sentence is basically the whole answer to this video's title. ApoB isn't missing from your lab work because someone's keeping it from you. It's missing because the guideline committees still treat LDL-C as the main number for most people and treat ApoB as a useful extra tool for the cases where LDL-C is shakier. Layer on decades of lab infrastructure built around Friedewald's formula, insurance billing that follows those same guidelines, and the sheer inertia of changing a test run on hundreds of millions of people every year. And you end up with a marker that's genuinely useful, well supported for specific groups, and still not on anyone's default checkup. A fair documentary doesn't stop at the flattering part. So let's talk about what's still genuinely unresolved for most people without diabetes, obesity, or high triglycerides. ApoB and LDL-C move together pretty closely. The two numbers usually agree. Ordering ApoB on top of a normal panel for someone in that lower risk category might not add much. The real value shows up concentrated in those specific metabolic situations we already covered. This isn't a story about LDL-C being broadly wrong, it's a story about LDL-C being wrong for a particular slice of people. There's also a live scientific argument about whether ApoB should fully replace LDL-C as the main treatment target, or simply ride alongside it. Some researchers want a full switch. Others point out that decades of statin trials were designed and measured around LDL-C, and shifting the primary target outright would need new outcome data built specifically around ApoB thresholds. Data that's still being collected. And then there's the practical issue of the test itself. ApoB measurement has gotten far more consistent across labs than it used to be. But historically, it's shown more lab-to-lab variation than the long-standing LDL-C calculation. Several lipid researchers point to exactly that, as a reason guideline groups have moved carefully instead of making ApoB the new universal default overnight. One of that means skip it. It means useful, increasingly recommended for the right people, not a magic replacement number, and definitely not something to interpret alone in a vacuum. If any of this applies to you, here's the realistic next move. And it isn't ordering a test online and diagnosing yourself from the result. Bring it up with your doctor directly, especially if early heart disease runs in your family, your triglycerides run high, you have diabetes or prediabetes, or your LDL-C looks fine, but something about your risk profile doesn't sit right with you. ApoB has to be specifically requested. It doesn't show up automatically with a standard panel. A few questions worth asking in that appointment. Given everything else going on with you, would ApoB actually tell your doctor more than LDL-C alone? Is your current LDL-C number calculated or directly measured? And does that distinction matter in your case? And if you do get ApoB tested, how does that number stack up against where your doctor would want it, given your overall risk? What this isn't is a green light to start adjusting your diet, supplements, or medication off one number you looked up yourself. A lab value is one data point. It's not a diagnosis, and it's definitely not a treatment plan on its own. So where does that leave us? LDL-C estimates the weight of cholesterol cargo. Your LDL particles are hauling around. It doesn't directly count the particles themselves. ApoB does count them, and a fairly solid stack of evidence, genetic studies, and a major cardiology consensus statement included, suggests particle count might predict heart disease risk more reliably, especially for anyone dealing with diabetes, high triglycerides, or obesity, where the usual math is shakiest. It's missing from routine panels because of history, slow-moving guidelines, and a real ongoing scientific debate. Not because anyone decided to keep it from you. The right response isn't panic, and it isn't running the test yourself and drawing your own conclusions. It's one specific, informed question at your next appointment. Next time, we're getting into what the research actually says about intermittent fasting after 50. What holds up and what quietly doesn't. Subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.